Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Easy Learn. And today's topic is the cosine rule, within which we're going to be doing some practice today. If you haven't watched my cosine rule explanation video yet, pause right here, check the link in the description below, go understand the concept first, and then come back for solving. So today's question is this is a triangle, as you can see, and the question has two parts. A part says show that q squared equals p squared minus p plus 61, and the B part says if p equals zero point 0.5, find q. Now coming back on my triangle, as you can notice, one of the length is 4 plus p, one of the length is q, and one of the length is 5 minus p. Now, and the angle that they've given is 120. Now, before we jump on to the complexity of the question, you need to realize that you're dealing with three lengths and one angle. That is this one, 120. So whenever we have three lengths and one angle, we are supposed to be using the cosine rule. Now, how do I decide which cosine rule formula or the formula arrangement that I have to use? Now, if you look carefully, what does the A part say? It says show that q squared equals p squared minus p plus 61. Now, what exactly is being asked? They've already kind of given me the answer. They've already given me what q squared equals. All they want is for us to show that how are we resulting in this particular question. How are we resulting to that solution? Q squared equals p squared minus p plus 61. How do I get there? So I have to show them how am I getting there. And for that, since I see that I have three lengths and one angle, I'm using the cosine rule. And which arrangement am I using? I am not finding the angle. The angle is already given to me. So I am dealing with the length formula. And even if that confuses you, you can just see that there's a q squared equals something here, which means that this q squared is the same as c squared, the c squared that we have in the cosine formula when we're finding the length, which means I'm going to be using the formula that is used to find the length, that is c squared equals a squared plus b squared minus 2ab cos c. Now, which one is my C? What's my capital C and what's my small c is important. Capital C always has to be the angle that you are dealing with. So I am dealing with 120 degrees, and the small c always has to be the length that is right opposite to my capital C. So if 120 is my capital C, then Q becomes my small c. That's the rule. Whatever length you have, the length right opposite, whatever angle you have, the length right opposite to that angle becomes your small c, which means that I just simply, in place of my c square, I'm going to be writing q squared. Now, q squared equals a squared plus b squared. Now, for that, I could take any of that as my a and any of that as my b. So I'm just going to be taking 4 plus b as my a, and let's say 5 minus p as my b. So putting all of that information inside this length formula, I'm going to be writing q squared equals 4 plus b whole squared plus the b squared. And you can't just do 5 minus p square, just the square on p. You can't do that. The entire length has to be squared. So entire length is 5 minus p. That's the reason I'm putting it in brackets. So 5 minus p, you close the bracket, and then you put a square on top. So 4 plus p squared plus 5 minus p squared minus, I'm just going to be taking 2 times 4 plus p, that's my a, times 5 minus b, that becomes my b, times cos c, that is cos 120. So this is how I go about solving this question. Now again, this is, I know, kind of complex, but you need to know how to solve this. And you just basically have to play around with a lot of multiplications and additions and subtractions, and that's how you will result in the solution that they have given. Now, first things first, we're going to be jumping on to something very easy. That is cos 120. Solving cos 120 is kind of the easiest of all because everything is just given to you. You don't really have to work out that much, or you don't have to use your brains on this. You just gotta grab out your scientific calculator and you gotta see what's your cos 120. Again, make sure that your calculator is set on degrees, and when it's on degrees, you just click cos, and cos 120 gives you negative 0.5. So I have a negative 0.5 here. So one of that is kind of set. Now, the other parts. The other parts say that 2 times 4 plus p times 5 minus p. Now, I can just let my 2 be where it is, or yeah, I can just let it be here. So let me just keep my 2 where it is. And now inside, I'm going to be having the solution for this. Now, how do you solve two brackets like these? I mean, I have 4 plus p and I have a 5 minus p. In order to solve this, in order to multiply this, you're going to be doing this way. This 4 has to be first multiplied with the 5. So 4 times 5 gives me 20. Then the next part, this 4 has to be multiplied with the p as well. So 4 times minus p is minus 4p. Second thing, now 4 is done. 4 is being multiplied with the 5. 4 has also been multiplied with the minus p. That's it. We're done with the 4. Now the second thing is this p. Now this p has to be multiplied with 5. So p times 5 gives me 5p. And then again, this p has to also be multiplied with the minus p. So p times minus p gives me minus p squared. And do not forget, everything is inside the bracket, and outside the bracket, I have this negative sign. Now, before we move on to solving this part, let's just kind of simplify all of this stuff and then get to one conclusion. So, let my minus be there, and now I'm going to be doing 20 minus 4p plus 5p minus p squared. Now, as you can see, that 4p and 5p, they're like terms, which means I can solve them. I have to do either subtraction or addition, whatever, to find out a final answer for the p. So let my 2 be here, 20. I'm just going to keep my 20 there. 4p minus 4p plus 5p just gives me a plus p minus p squared. And that I have it times negative 0.5. Now, before I do 2 times 20 and 2 times p and 2 times negative p squared, and then I multiply entire thing with with negative 0.5 or negative half, all of that is just going to be a lot of work. So I'm just going to first do 2 times negative 0.5. So 2 times negative 0.5 has to be, it's just 2 divided by 2. 2 divided by negative 2, you can say, or whatever, 2 if you have to, so that becomes 1. And because there is a negative sign, so this whole thing becomes negative 1. So negative 1 times 20 plus p minus p squared. Now this negative 1 multiplied with all of this, so I will have something like this. Negative 1 times 20 gives me negative 20, and then negative 1 times p gives me a negative p, and negative 1 times negative p squared gives me a positive p squared. Now, once I have all of that, you can now also open up this bracket. Now, I can't do anything further to this part. Why? Because I have a 20, that's a number. I have a p, that's a variable. I have a p square, that is another expression or another variable with a square on top. So all of these are unlike terms. So I can't really do anything to that. So when I open this bracket up, so minus and minus of minus 20 gives me a positive 20. Then minus of minus p gives me a positive p again, and minus of plus p squared gives me a minus p squared. Now, this is half the part from here till here. I am technically done with half of the thing. So I have 20 plus p minus p squared. Now coming to a more complex part. So once you have this stuff set, you can, if you want, you can just um, erase the other part, or if you're doing it in one single go, it's fine. You can keep it like that. So 20 plus p minus p squared. Now if I want to solve 4 plus p squared plus 5 minus p squared. Now how do I solve this? 4 plus p squared basically means 4 plus p times 4 plus p. And to solve this again, you're going to follow this rule or this step that we did on when we were doing 4 plus p times 5 minus p. So we had to basically get the four terms outside once we multiplied. So similarly, when you are squaring something, you have to get you when you're squaring two variables or a number and a variable inside a bracket, then you always have to end up in something like this. You will have to have four terms that you come up with, and then once you solve the like terms, then you end up in just one single term there, and in total you'll have three terms. So there's also a rule for this. The rule says that if I have something like this, a plus b whole squared, when you open it up, it becomes a squared plus 2ab plus b squared. That's a general rule that when you open up a bracket like this, you will end up in a squared plus 2ab plus b squared, which means that even if I have to solve this, I can either just put it like that, which means that I could do 4 squared, that is 16, plus 2 times ab. So this is basically my a and this is my b. So if I do 2ab, which means that 2 times 4, that's 8, and 8 times b, that is 8p. So I'll just have 8p plus b squared, which would just give me plus b squared. So this is also one way of doing this, but if this usually confuses us. When I was in school, I remember I could never figure this out. Whenever I had something like this, I would just end up in doing a squared plus b squared as my final answer, and I would always get it wrong. So when you don't remember such stuff, it's just always good practice or better practice to write it down separately like this, 4 plus p times 4 plus p, so that you will ultimately end up doing the multiplication four times. You'll know that, okay, I got to do 4 times 4, then 4 times p, then p times 4, and p times p. So that just makes it easier. This is for those who are confused with this a plus b whole squared part and do not know how would they end up in a square and 2ab and another b squared. So that just makes life easier for those who are confused with this step. You can just open it up and do it like that. So now I'm just going to be doing, let me just do it on one side over here. If I do 4 plus p times 4 plus p. So I'm going to be solving this. First of all, 4 times 4, that gives me 16. And then 4 times p, that gives me 4p. And then p times 4 again, that gives me another 4p. And then p times p, that gives me, p times p gives you p squared. So 16 plus, because this and this, the 4p and the 4p are like terms for each other. So I'm going to be doing 4 plus 4, that's 8p, and then plus p squared. Now, if I was supposed to be using this one, a squared plus 2ab plus b squared, I would get the same answer because 4 times 4 is 16, 2 times 4 is 8, 8 times b would be 8p, and then b squared, that would be the p there, so p squared is just p squared. So I would get the same answer anyway. But I just decided to kind of open it up so that it's easier for you. Now I got 4 plus p and 4 plus p there, which gave me 16 plus 8p plus p squared. Now coming to the other part, that is 5 minus p squared. Again, if you want, you can use it using this formula, the a plus b whole squared and all that. Otherwise, you can just simply open up. So I'm going to do 5 minus p times 5 minus p. So again, I gotta do 5 times 5, that gives me a 25, and then 5 times negative p, that gives me negative 5p. Then again, minus p times 5 gives me another negative 5p, and then minus p times minus p. So minus and minus gives me a plus, and p gives me a p squared. So I got 25 minus 5p minus 5p plus p squared. Now, again, I have two like terms, that is 5p and 5p are my like terms. So I'm going to do 25 minus 5 and minus 5 gives me minus 10. So 25 minus 10p plus p squared. Whew, that's a lot of work. So once I have my 16 plus 8p plus p squared, and just going back all the way up, as you can see, there's a 4 plus p whole squared plus 5 minus p whole squared. You gotta be adding both these things. So Now, which means that this 25 minus 10p plus p squared, if I add it up with 16 plus 8p plus p squared. So let's just kind of sum it down. And 25, you got to check what do you have for 25 plus 16. So 25 plus 16 gives me something like this, 41. And then I have minus 10p plus 8p, that gives me minus 2p. And then I have p squared plus p squared. So this is basically like 1p squared plus 1p squared. That gives me a 2p squared. Now, once I have all of that, which means that this part of the equation is now solved. This is, let's say, the first part, and that was the second part. So once I'm done with my first and second part, I gotta just put that up in. Now I already have my second part in here, and now I gotta write down my first part. This is kind of getting very messy, so I'm just gonna get rid of all of that. But before that, let me just write down the final stuff with another color. So I have a 41 minus 2p plus 2p squared. And that has to be added with all of this. So 41 minus 2p plus 2p squared plus 20 plus p minus p squared. So when I do 41 plus 20, you gotta check what is 41 plus 20. So 41 plus 20 gives me 61. So let me just write down. So 61, and then when I have minus 2p plus p, so minus 2 plus 1 gives me a minus 1. So 61 minus p, and plus 2p squared minus p squared gives me plus p squared. And going back to the original part, that all of that is going to be equal to q squared. So here is what I have as q squared. So after all this mess that I have created, you can see that I have ended up in a p squared, in a minus p, in a 61, and all of that equals to q squared. And if I want to write it the same way that they have given, you just got to rearrange. So if I write it down, let me just change my color again to make it more simple. So I have q squared equals, just rearranging the entire thing the way they have given. So I have p squared minus p plus 61. And that's pretty much how you go about solving this. First of all, just figure out that when you have three lengths and you have one angle, you're using the cosine rule. For the cosine rule, you're going to be using the length formula. Using that, you're going to arrange everything up here with q square equals your ab squares and plus, and then you have a minus 2ab cos 120. Simply just do cos 120, you get some answer, multiply with 2, you get your negative 1, and inside, when you solve, remember, when you're solving brackets like these, you always end up in four terms where one of the terms are like terms of each other, so you end up in final three terms in the end. And when you have that, you just solve all the like terms, deal with your pluses and your minuses, end up in one part of the equation being solved, and then come back on the second part. If you want, you can just start off with the first, the 4p squared and 5 minus p squared first, and then do the rest of the part. I just found it easier that that one is kind of simpler to handle, so I started off the other way. So once you're done with the first part, go ahead with your second part. When you open up your squares, either you can just directly do this a squared plus 2ab plus b squared, or you can just break them down and then solve it. You will have four terms, then you add or subtract the like terms, and then you get up and you get another quadratic equation. Then you add up both of them, you get a specific one again, and then you take this second part, or the second part of the equation, put it into the first part, or vice versa, taking the first part and putting into the second part, and then you solve all of that. And once you solve all of that, you are going to end up in the answer that they have given, that is p squared minus p plus 61. Now I'm just going to get rid of all of that. Now the next part of the question says that you got to find your q if your p is given as 0.5. Now, another thing, even if in an examination, if it's hard to show this stuff and you are not able to figure it out, you will lose some marks. Just try your best, how much ever you can, so show them, and how much ever you can solve. Just do whatever you want so that you get maybe 1 or 2 marks or 3 marks. If it's a, let's say, 5 or 6 mark question, you will get at least 3 to 4 if you show some part of it. As I told you, that you can solve one part of the equation first, the second part then. So maybe even if you have some mistakes in the first part, the second part would be fine. If there's second part there's some wrong stuff, then first part you will get some marks or the other. And even if you just mess up the first part, that's the A part, then there's still hope in the B part. Why? Because if P is equal to zero point 0.5, find Q. Now, in this particular situation, you can just simply put your P there. You don't really have to care anyway that how you got this Q squared equals P squared minus P and all that. You can just put in your P inside this whole equation and anyway find your q. So even if you're not getting good marks in part A, part B you should just score full marks. So q squared equals p squared, that is zero point 0.5. So zero point 0.5 squared minus zero point 0.5 plus 61. And if you check that on your calculator, as you can see, zero point 0.5 squared minus zero point 0.5 plus 61 gives me my q squared, that is 60.75. Now, once you have that, you got to find your q. And to find your q, you got to take your square to the other side. So in order to take your square to the other side, when it goes there, it becomes square root. So q equals square root of 60.75. So square root of that is going to give you 7.794. Square root sign is right here on your calculator. When you do that, square root of 60.75, you have 7.79, which means my Q is 7 point. Either you can just round off to one decimal place or you can keep it two decimal places. So I'm just going to be writing Q equals 7.79. That is pretty much it. It was a lot of work, it was a lot of confusion. If you have any questions, anything that still is unclear to you, you can ask me, you can post it down on the comment section below, and do let me know how the video was. If you have any suggestions, anything that you would like to add, just let me know. And thank you so much for watching. Thank you for watching Easy Learn. Do not forget to like, share, and subscribe my channel. Take care of yourselves. Until next time.